and welcome to another skillup.gg video. At SkillUp, we spend thousands of hours trawling YouTube for the best quality gaming tutorial videos so that you don't have to. Check us out over at www.skill-up.gg. Today, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We're going to be doing some weapon testing with the intent of unpacking some of the stats used in the division. When I first looked at weapon stats, I was a little bit dubious about this stat called stability, as it seemed a little too generic for my taste. So I went into the beta this weekend with the intent of doing some weapon testing, and here are the results. There's some pretty important findings here, so let's get straight to it. So the first thing I noticed when doing this testing was that the reticle behaved in a very different way when I was aiming down sights, based on the weapon that I had equipped. Now, I have to caveat all of this by saying that this is just a theory, as I did my best to research this, but I couldn't find anything definitive. But I'm fairly certain that this movement in your reticle as you're aiming down sights is affected by the stat known as initial bullet stability. Now, this makes a lot of sense since your reticle moving is super annoying when you're trying to fire at long ranges in particular, and you'd ideally like some kind of stat to be able to reduce this. I tried to test this by applying a grip to my weapon and comparing the results, but I think it's a little inconclusive at this point as to whether or not it has an effect. For now though, I'm willing to call this a potential stat to watch until we get some clarification from the developer. So learning point number one here is that unconfirmed, there is a stat called initial bullet stability, which affects how much the reticle moves without you firing the gun. It can of course be modified by weapon mods, or simply by the base stats of the weapon. This stat is going to be particularly important on Marksman Rifles, as you're going to be spending a lot of time firing from long ranges. Now, the next component of weapon stability that we'll discuss is something often referred to as 0 point return. So 0 point return refers to the degree to which the reticle returns to its original position after you pull the trigger, without adjusting for any of the recoil. So it's not trying to correct for its aim, just how does the cursor behave? And it's a really big part of the way that weapons work in the division. Now here you're seeing me use the assault rifle, and what you're seeing is that it's actually got a fair amount of 0 point return kicking in. You can see me firing there, and it's going right up and to the left, and then it just comes back down and recenters. It doesn't go straight, it doesn't go directly back to where it was, but it does come down a fair way and pretty close to its 0 point. So that's what we talk about when we say 0 point return. How much does the game automatically try and get your reticle back to where it started? Now with a shotgun, it's a completely different story. Here you're seeing it's got a huge amount of recoil, huge amount of kick, and almost zero, or no 0 point return, I should say. That the cursor or the reticle is not moving back to where it started. When the recoil occurs, the game just lets the gun stay there, stay where it is, rather than trying to adjust that for you. That 0 point return that we saw on the assault rifle simply isn't there for the likes of the shotgun. Switching weapons now, we're going to take a look at the submachine gun. And we see here that the recoil on this weapon is actually really low. So the amount of 0 point return required on this is actually quite small. However, it is present. So here I'm just burst firing to demonstrate at first. And now I really start to kick it up, and you can see that the cursor does move away from the central point, but it then does return to that point. It's got a little bit of 0 point return, making it fairly easy to control that weapon, given it's only got some fairly limited recoil in the first instance. You probably know this already, given how easy it is to use this weapon in the beta. Next up, we have the light machine gun, which really behaves in almost identical terms to the assault rifle. So you can see here that I'm burst firing, and there is a lot of 0 point return kicking in. It's spraying up and then coming back down, spraying up, coming back down. So now I'm going to give it more of a run. I'm just going to slowly increase the amount of bullets that I'm using per burst, and you're going to see that 0 point return really kick in. So there it is right there. Big adjustments in terms of where my cursor is moving to at the end of that magazine. So next up we have Marksman Rifle, which is really interesting because it actually behaves the same way as the shotgun. So here you're seeing I'm pulling the trigger just a single time. I'm letting it return to its 0 point as best it can. But you see that it's not actually returning to its 0 point. It's shooting straight up, and then it's not trying to adjust for that recoil at that point. The cursor is simply staying where it is after I pulled the trigger, and the movement of that reticle is further enhanced by the initial stability, the initial bullet stability stat that we spoke about earlier. So the reticle is rotating or moving around, plus the recoil, which means that, you know, over time that reticle is moving quite a bit away from where it first started. It's not returning to its 0 point. So in summary, point 2, there is an invisible stat called 0 point return that affects the degree to which your reticle returns to its original point when firing a weapon. It's a separate stat from weapon recoil. Some weapons have very high 0 point returns, such as assault rifles, SMGs, and LMGs, while some have almost no 0 point return, such as shotguns and marksman rifles. So next up, we're going to take a look at weapon recoil. Now this is a high rate of fire marksman rifle, and all I'm doing here is I'm pulling the trigger. And as you can see, it's really arcing up pretty wildly as I'm doing that, because I'm firing very quickly. It's not giving the gun enough time to recenter its reticle in the middle. See how the crosshairs are actually becoming larger, right? So that means that when I take the next shot, the reticle is displaced, right? In this instance here, I'm actually firing the shots much slower. And so it gives the reticle more time to recenter itself, meaning that my shots are, in the end, more accurate. Same number of shots, but a completely different path in terms of how they look, due to the fact that they're more accurate. And it's better exemplified with this slow rate of fire marksman rifle, where again, I'm just pulling the trigger here as fast as I can, but because the weapon has so much time to recenter itself, you're getting these very accurate shots. The weapon really isn't moving that much. So with this new knowledge, we can then actually redefine weapon stability and say that weapon stability is a function of initial bullet stability, that is the degree to which the reticle moves when I don't do anything other than aim down sight. It's a function of 0 point return, which is the degree to which the reticle naturally returns to its original position after firing. And it's also a function of recoil, which is the angle at which the cursor moves when I fire a shot. These three effects are modified by the rate of fire of a weapon. As the faster I fire, the more pronounced the effect of initial bullet stability and 0 point return become. Alright, so now for the good stuff. I want to talk about something really interesting as it relates to weapon recoil arc and hip fire. So here you're seeing me firing an assault rifle, and all I'm doing is I'm pulling the trigger, I'm letting the natural recoil kick it back, and you're seeing that it's going up. So that was 3 clips of ammo that I used just then, and that was by aiming down sights. Now watch what happens when I don't aim down sights. You can see here that the total angle, the recoil angle arc, is actually much smaller when I am not aiming down sights. When I'm hip firing the weapon, it only goes up a certain amount, far less than it does when as compared to when I'm aiming down sights. So we look now at a submachine gun, and we're aiming down sights here, and you can see the amount that it goes up there. 1, 2 clips, and we're now looking at a 3rd clip. Yep. So now we're going to do hip fire, and we're going to see that for this weapon, it's actually quite the same. The angle at which it recoils, the recoil arc angle, is quite similar between hip fire versus aim down sight. So next up, we're going to have a look at a slow rate of fire marksman rifle. And here we're going to see, first of all, us aiming down sights, which we're going to do right about now. In just a minute. There it is. So we see here that we're firing the gun, and we're aiming down sights. We're seeing the total recoil arc that's kicking in there is really small, as we've seen earlier in the video. We're doing just a simple hip fire shot, and we can see that it actually arcs out quite a bit wider, higher, right? And that's not actually to do with the angle of the arc, of the recoil arc. It has to do with overall weapon accuracy and the fact that the reticle is very large at that point. Now we move on to the shotgun, and this is where things are really interesting. So you're seeing here that the total arc for the shotgun is that amount when we're aiming down sights. It's fairly large. When we hip fire, though, it's a totally different story. And what you can see here is that it hits its maximum arc point really early on, right? So you can just see that it really doesn't arc back that high, nowhere near as high as it did when I was aiming down sights. It's a much smaller arc, which is really important when you're using the shotgun, because you realize that it actually doesn't when you're hip firing it, it doesn't kick back as high as as you think it might. So it's a really fantastic weapon to use at hip fire range. This here is the light machine gun, and here you can see that it really has a huge amount of kick on it, a huge amount of recoil arc. And when we are using hip fire, it's less. You know, it's not a huge amount of difference, but certainly it's not as high. That arc is not as high as it was when we were aiming down sights. And this one here is our high rate of fire Marksman Rifle. So this one kicks up really high, really far, comes back down towards the end, and it always does these random shots where it sort of drops back down for a minute. Now we're going to look at hip fire for that weapon, and we're going to see that it still kicks up. It's within the same sort of ballpark, similar to the light machine gun. It is lower than the aim down sights value, but it's still there. You know, it's still very much a thing. So yeah, this is a really important finding, I think, in the context of weapons. They behave differently from a recoil perspective when you're aiming down sights versus when you are hip firing them. And it's particularly advantageous for shotguns because you are seeing there that the total amount of kickback on a shotgun when you're aiming down sights is a lot more than if you are hip firing. So lesson 4 here can be summarized as recoil arc, or the total angle at which your gun will kick back over the course of a magazine, actually varies whether or not you're aiming down sights or hip firing. And you can use this to your advantage, particularly with the shotgun, which seems to be purpose made for hip fire use. So the last thing I wanted to say was that I think pistols can be pretty great in the context of what we've just discussed. They have a really surprisingly low amount of recoil. In fact, almost no recoil. You can see here, I'm actually not adjusting the aim of this. I'm just pulling the trigger and it's hitting 0 almost every single time. Really, really strong. Not all pistols are like this, obviously. I have a Magnum, which has a lot of kick on it and really sprays wildly. But I guess with the right pistol in your hand, you can definitely aim for a fair amount of accuracy in your shots, which is going to be fairly useful to you, say, in the dark zone. So that's it from me, guys. I really hope you found this useful. It's been really fun putting it together. I've certainly learnt a lot. We here at Skill Up are loving the Division and really looking forward to its release on March 8th. Recorded a whole bunch of other weapon testing footage, and I plan to release a whole bunch of videos between now and the launch. So be sure to like and subscribe, check back, and yeah, we'll see you at skillup.gg. Thanks all, bye-bye.